can we start by disagreeing about something, Gavin?
Yes. I love a good disagreement.
The first piece, which you said it was kind of addictive but unbearable. I could have sat through any amount of that. I find it was just so trance-like.
Yeah, I was being a little bit facetious, but I must admit, I like those situations. It's, as human beings, we don't tend to normally put ourselves into positions of uncomfort. It's not our natural, it's not our natural disposition, and I think with that type of art by De Maria, he's conscious that he's pushing us outside of into a different zone, into a different place that normally we wouldn't necessarily, you're not going, well, you might now that you've revealed yourself, but I wouldn't go home and put the lasagna in the oven and turn that on the radio and think this is great, But yeah. I like sitting in the audience and having that almost like, oh my God, like kind of uncomfortable feeling it creates
funny.
me.
I mean, maybe towards the end we'll put it to the vote. I mean, I didn't find it at all uncomfortable. I mean, because the one thing it wasn't, it certainly wasn't boring.
No.
Because it had that kind of just incredible, all those different rhythms. You could just really, there was no friction between what it was doing and sort of my desire for, for something else to be happening. Yeah.
He was really onto something, and for the benefit again of the audience, he only ever made those two pieces of music. And much to the disappointment of many of his friends, and in fact, he went on to become the founding drummer in the Velvet Underground, which is also a little known aspect about De Maria. But then he thought that the lifestyle just wasn't for him, and he then focused his attention on sculpture. But it actually that helix-like relationship that between the sculpture and the music was really a question I had for you. And one thing that I believe led De Maria away from music and toward the object is that you mentioned this temporal manifestation in the spatial, and that really is at the essence of De Maria's project. I feel it. I loved you being the human Geiger counter, and I think I encounter that regularly with art. Not all art, but with artists like Walter, who took an enormous amount of time to make singular objects, much to the disappointment again of many people who wanted him to produce in an art world-like fashion in a speed that was commercially viable. But he resisted that, and he made objects like the one that's in the galleries now, the circle rectangle piece. But I think in that process, he was trying to get to that place that you describe, which was to put something intangible into something tangible, to give it value.
Yes, well, that thing of time is so important, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me what I kept thinking, listening to the piece of music, because it's been such a really important part of my life, of Indian classical music. And I think, as those of you who are also Indian classical music fans, and of course it's a big part of Lamont Young's formation, isn't it? That you will get in the background that drone, and then you'll get the extended unaccompanied alap, whereby there is no beat. It's just a solo instrument. But then at some point you will get a sort of pulse introduced into the solo instrument, and then that pulse will build up to this giving you this kind of craving, and ideally at that moment, then the percussion in North Indian classical music, the tabla will enter, and it's the return of time. And it seems to me that one of the things that goes on in the lightning field is that he's so insistent about how regular everything is. And there was a thing that we haven't. There's a sort of joke in my piece that one of my friends there, who's very short, he says, you know, the poles are all of different lengths, and then his tall girlfriend says yes, because they're all the same height. I.e., he's allowed for the variation in ground level, so that you could apparently place a sheet of glass on the top of these poles. And I think it's that kind of tension between the absolute rigidity of what he does, and the way that, and it happened when Stockton was playing, that your thoughts are all over the place. And it was, for me, when I was listening to that, I was thinking, in a way, you know, the perfect thing to perform that music is sort of a drum machine. But then I think you would lose a really important part of the drama of the performance, and it's another reason why it wasn't boring, which was because there seemed to be, you know, was he going to mess up? Yeah. Which, of course, the drum machine won't mess up.
Yes.
You know, but that's what made it, I thought, the opposite of boring. It was actually full of suspense and excitement. And crucially, and this is the other thing that it seems to me that goes on when you get this intersection of the spatial over time, you get a kind of narrative dimension to it. There was a really strong narrative thing happening in the music, in that it was all the same, but it was changing. And then you'd get that thing of, because of just whenever you get that repetitive stuff in you're listening to, you get these sort of phantom instruments. Although it turns out one of the phantom instruments you explained afterwards might be the playing. Yeah.
I was concerned for him at one point. I thought he was in a lot of pain, but
Stockton.
Yes.
Oh, apart from Billy Higgins, who would always be sort of grinning, drummers always they have to just show the agony of concentration.
Are there other? So I search out art objects in my job that have that energy in them, and for me it's one of my barometers of value, you know, and I guess, you know, the responsibility of acquiring objects for a museum. You know, you try to avoid fashion, and you try to undertake research, and you try to search and dig and find. It's archaeological almost, you know. You're trying to find things that you believe to have value, and you seem to be on a similar journey.
Oh yes, and you know, for me, it's because I'm not invested in the business, as it were. I don't need to fake it at all. And I'm always looking for these big experiences. You know, I really am, and I've realised that there's no point faking it. You know. So I don't really know Texas so well. Is it one of these situations whereby, is it like a Los Angeles, San Francisco thing, where if you're in LA, people love you to diss San Francisco and vice versa? But I mean, so I'll say something about Houston. So you do like hearing ill of Houston. So, you know, I went along to the Rothko Chapel. You know, I was really going to have this big experience. It was Rothko, it's a chapel, you know, it was exactly what I'm in the market for. It just didn't happen at all. It just didn't happen. And, you know, you could, as a art world pro, you could try to sell it to me, and it just wouldn't happen, because, yeah, it just wouldn't really. And that's just something that, you know, I sort of know when it's happening, and there's often yeah, the guarantee, a thing can have a very exalted reputation. There's no guarantee that it's going to happen for me. So that, but it's not at all unusual for me to go to a place and then find actually, the thing I went to see didn't deliver, but something else did.
Yeah.
On the other hand, goodness knows, if you want the ultimate experience, we're talking about this, the vibration that places give off. You go to Varanasi in India, and you get there, and you're just, your Geiger counter breaks actually, because it just can't handle all the, just the multiple levels of vibration, of cosmic vibration that place is giving off.
I'm very interested in that emotional attitude or emotional intelligence, I guess. But it's very unfashionable in the art world right now. It used to be very great German painting of the 19th century. It was this auratic quality, and it dealt with the sublime. There is strong traditions of it in Europe, but I think I've always been, or of course, through my actual academic work, which is post-minimum conceptual art, so it's like 62 to 72, but I think I've always been interested in the Americans' search for that through objects, because they didn't have Roman ruins, and they didn't have images like what you had in Syria, but what America did have has other power, has other industrial power, has other New World power that I think some of these artists, that whether it's Smithson or De Maria or Heiser, they're sort of trying to blend Egypt with American power somehow, which I think is fascinating.
Or to put it more simply, as Wallace Stevens says in that how does that great poem go? I placed a jar in Tennessee, and there's, I first came across that poem when Larry Harvey, the founder of Burning Man, was making a defense of the artwork, the art at Burning Man, which a lot of the time it's not, maybe not so great. But as he said, on that great expanse of the playa, things look amazing. And then he quoted that Wallace Stevens poem. I can't remember how it goes now, but it's, I placed a jar in Tennessee. And he sort of says that basically everything converged on this. So I think there's a lot of that going on just by virtue of the kind of vastness of the landscape. And, when I spent a month in Marfa, I remember thinking after a day, oh my God, what am I going to do in this place? And of course, at the end of a month, I realized, it's really not, this is not nearly long enough.
Yeah.
Partly just because of the titanic skies, that's enough, that's plenty of activity. But I realized, stupidly, I've forgotten what I most wanted to say, which is this, that thing that I'm looking for, if I had to give a name for it, it would be, of course, the zone. And I take that, from the Tarkovsky film Stalker, which, God, it sounds like I'm hustling my wares now, which I've written a whole book about this film. But the film, as many of you will know, it takes the form of this guide, a stalker in the sense of scout. And he takes two people on a trip through this area, the zone, at the heart of which it's alleged is the room where your deepest wishes will come true. Your wish, in a way, for the ultimate experience. And the amazing thing about this film is that all the time these two things are holding themselves absolutely in balance, i.e., yes, it does have these magical powers that Stalker claims, and no, it's just a building site. And those two things are going on all the time. And that crucial element, Tarkovsky is a straight down the line Russian Orthodox Christian, but as an artist, he just allows this amazing amount of doubt into the film. And that again is what gives it this incredible suspense and tension. And it's a literal journey through this place. So it's got that narrative.
And you've mentioned poets and you've mentioned filmmakers, and in relation to literature, what, this is perhaps a more pedestrian question, or what is fueling you at the moment? What are things that are on your radar, on your bedside table, or on audiobooks on your iPlayer?
Oh, well, loads of stuff. I mean, just, this, there's tons of stuff going on. I mean, I've just finished this thing about Gary Winogrand. And actually, I mean, there's a more general point. I mean, I like going to places. I mean, and many years ago when I wrote this book about a general sort of history of photography, and I didn't go anywhere. All I did is, I'd have my breakfast down in the kitchen, spooning up my muesli, and then I'd go upstairs into my study, and I'd enter this realm, this place of American photography. Not an actual physical journey of more than 10 seconds, but, it was this other world. And that's when I first became interested in Winogrand, famously inexhaustible. And now I've just finished this little book specifically about him. And my main sense of Winogrand, if it makes sense, is, oh my God, he's even more inexhaustible than I realized. He really is inexhaustible. I still want to see more Winogrands.
Wow, well that would be, and that publication is coming out with the university?
Early 2018, yeah.
We look forward to that. I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Okay.
But I was almost going to ask you about Pauline Oliveras, who's a great, also drone musician from Texas, who sadly passed away this year. But I must not forget to ask you about John Berger.
Oh, yeah.
Because I understand that whilst being an iconic art critic, even for myself as a student, and he passed away recently, but is someone for you was a mentor and had a lasting impression upon you. But I wonder, could you just conclude my questions by saying something about John?
Yeah. So John Berger, born in 1926 and died on 2nd of January this year. And it was he'd been so important to me as every kind of writer, not just as an art critic, as a novelist, as a uncategorizable writer. He'd been a wonderful friend to me, and I say that partly because there was nothing special about that. I mean, what I'm realizing is he was such an amazing friend to so many people from all walks of life. And I mean, Berger, more than anyone, I think, it was the person who got me interested in art, and he performed a very simple thing, really. It was, I mean, I'll express it in the simplest way possible. He made boring old paintings of men in ruffs, those dreary old oil paintings. He made them interesting. And of course, you only need to do that. You only need to make one boring old piece of music by Mozart or whatever interesting. You only need to make one boring old play by Shakespeare interesting. And then a whole universe of culture is opened up for you. And it was really striking of what a massive thing this was when Berger died. I mean, the extent of just how much he meant to so many people was really amazing, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin.
I wondered if there were questions from the floor, and we'd be happy to take some. This lady in the front. Hello. Oh, there's someone coming down now.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Marian Hines. I'm from Dallas. I've been to the Keys in Florida, and I wondered if either of you have been to drive down to go to Key West. There's a 7-mile bridge, and I was in a convertible in the 70s driving down there, and it's like you're floating on the water because it's a 7-mile bridge. So there's no land. There's all these islands around you, but you can't see them because you're just in the water. It's an amazing experience. I had experience somewhat like that, not as good, but still pretty good. The new sculpture that's on Elm, about a block from Neiman Marcus here in Dallas. It's the sculpture is from the Northwest, and he did some work for the Olympics. 4510 asked him to come and do a piece of sculpture. It's 35 feet tall. So I saw it in November, still no wind. I saw it in December with 25, 35 mile an hour winds. And the store was playing music that was magical. It is absolutely stunning, that piece of sculpture. So when I saw it still, it was beautiful. But it became alive with the wind.
Yeah.
It was really beautiful.
Well, as a way of answering that, can I show you another piece of alive sculpture? That's a Winogrand. So this is in Luxor in Egypt, and there's so as you can see, what's happened. It's a kind of a man and a woman, a king and a queen of some kind, and of course she's been sort of cut in half. But so there it is. It's in stone. But something really incredible happens if you just move slightly to one side. So here it is. This thing has been around for all these tens of thousands of years, but it turns out it's still alive, because when you go to take a picture from the other side, she just buries her head behind his shoulder. Isn't it the most incredible thing? You know, you can just imagine them, this kind of couple in love. They're having this serious picture taken. You know, there it is. You know, and there they are. It's just the most wonderful thing when sculpture comes alive like that, I think. That was a sort of answer.
Okay, I was just. Oh, sorry.
I don't think you're here long enough to go to 4510, but it's a spectacular, shocking experience.
Oh, right, okay.
You don't have to go in the store, it's on the outside.
Okay, thank you.
I just, when you said about your Houston experience, I wondered if you had a chance to see anything else there, specifically if you were able to go into the Dan Flavin installation or the Cy Twombly, and if you had equally reactive experiences.
The truth is, I can't remember. This was ages ago that I was there in Houston, but I'm sure I'd have had a great reaction to Dan Flavin and Cy Twombly.
And did you get to see the new, I just blanked, who is in Houston at Rice, the Terrell? You haven't gotten to see the Terrell installation?
Not there, but I've had some majorly great Terrell experiences, yeah.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, by any chance?
No, I haven't been to
They
that
had
one.
him in the United States before anyone else. I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm very proud of that.
Good.
Anyway.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments, disagreements? This gentleman.
Toss one out since you've come all this way for us. It seems like the visual arts have been making representations of unchanging aspects of nature forever, putting the mounds out there. Well, obviously, when the first people, kind of crawled out of the jungle and, were being exposed to sensations, like the ocean. I mean, the ocean's been making ocean sounds continuously, unchangingly for several billion years now. And I was sort of wondering if he was making a comment about, okay, why don't we take, music and sound back to some of those, long scale, unchanging but still vibrant kind of existence. I don't know if that thought runs through anything he had to say about his art or how it's viewed.
Gavin, you're better placed than I am to answer that.
I'm happy to respond first. For sure, De Maria was ecologically minded, and he was brought when he was at Berkeley, and there was this. I'd mentioned he had said that Lamont Young was the only person of any consequence that he had met whilst he was there, and Young, the term field music might be familiar to the audience, and he would bring the students into the woods and just have them record nature, and sometimes they were recording silence ostensibly, except for the odd creaking sound of a tree or the rustling of leaves or something in the air, and that was where De Maria got the idea for the crickets and cricket music, and then later the sounds of the crashing waves and ocean music. And it absolutely signposted a generation of artists' interest in the land, and that again, and Geoff made reference to this in Texas at Marfa, but also whilst America, what's absent from the landscape are perhaps some of the architectural magnificence of some things that happen in Europe, but what you have is land, you know, and beautiful, beautiful earth, and it's breathtaking, and I think artists in the 60s became highly attuned to that, and they wanted, in my opinion, they foresaw the advancement of societies and the kind of the growth of city, and they imagined, they wouldn't have imagined that it's grown out of our wildest nightmare, but they were feeling that. That's why a lot of these artists were leaving the cities of New York and leaving the cities of Los Angeles and going out into these non-sites, these no spaces, and they felt more comfortable there.
That seemed to me a better answer than I could have come up with.
The interesting thing is that when you take somebody from New York and you put them out in rural New Mexico, the silence will almost drive them crazy. I mean, we each have very disparate reactions to the same sound over there. And the same thing, you take somebody, once you've been there a while, the silence is why you go there.
Mm-hmm.
You take it to New York, that'll drive you crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope, and I'm glad, I hope that the gentleman who, in the painting from 1863, the question of the Sphinx,
Mm-hmm.
I hope what that gentleman was hoping to hear from the mouth of the Sphinx is something that we can all still hope for.
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
One final question before we segue to the book signing. I'm going to put Stockton on the spot a little bit, or give him the opportunity, if he wants, just to share any insights he had about immersing himself in De Maria's art and performing it. Just anything you might want to say, Stockton.
Well, I really don't want to have to speak after these gentlemen. They're so eloquent, so I'll try to be brief. But my perspective on preparation for these performances was very technical, in that I was just trying to do the closest replication of the originals as possible. And whenever I'm in a situation where I'm replicating someone else's compositions, I focus on the various technical aspects that will hopefully do justice to the composer's original intent. So it's been a lot of fun for me to hear everyone's perspective on it. My technical perspective on it would be, having done some research and reading about De Maria's comments about the pieces and what influenced him, he stated in a couple different interviews that he was listening to a lot of John Coltrane's music in the early 60s, and John Coltrane was experimenting with long swaths of time, and the common phrase is sheets of sound is what John Coltrane was experimenting with on his tenor saxophone, which was being only able to sustain one note at a time. His idea was to play scales so quickly that it gave you the aural illusion of hearing a chord. And one of the quotes, and I'm not quoting it verbatim, that De Maria said was that he had to come to terms with Coltrane's music. And some of his friends who he was in the rock band with at the time were listening to a lot of John Coltrane's music. And as a huge jazz music fan, I definitely was able, I think, to approach connecting with these performance pieces in the way that I connected a lot to the great drummer Elvin Jones, who was John Coltrane's drummer. And even, it was really fascinating to see some of those pictures. I had not seen them. You could see that the type of cymbals that were being used there were the identical Zildjian cymbals that were hand-hammered and played by all the drummers in the New York City area. So those were some of the things that struck me. And I thought one of the other interesting things about it was that from the time he recorded cricket music in 1964, he really seemingly didn't play drums hardly at all for the next couple years until he did Ocean's music. And I think that most definitely the endurance involved with playing cricket's music was the endurance that a drummer who was playing 6 or 7 nights a week would have. Mm-hmm. And it's not near as challenging endurance-wise to do Ocean's music, because from a performance standpoint, he switches the responsibility between the two pieces. In cricket music, the drums are the primary voice that eventually, after a long period of time, give way to the field recording becoming louder in the mix. Ocean's music is really a photo negative of that, where it starts with the track and then the drums sneak in. So that was one of the interesting things for me. And the other fun and challenging thing about both of these items was that the original field recordings, which would be the crickets or the ocean by themselves, so we would call that unaltered without the drums on it, don't exist to my knowledge in the research I did. And so for the cricket music piece, I created the cricket ambient track by downloading a whole bunch of free ambient cricket sounds that apparently people listen to sleep.
Yeah.
And so I downloaded 5 or 6 of them, and I mixed them all together, and then I tried to pitch correct them so that they would sound like the crickets on Dave Maria's original. But then on Oceans, that is actually the field recording. I was able to find to sample a portion of that from Dave Maria's original recording where there were no drums yet, and I looped it for my performance so that his original drums weren't in there. So just kind of some nerdy technical drum stuff for you. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Geoff, to Gavin, to Stockton, and to all of you for joining us tonight. We'll see you at the book signing.